Canada is renowned for its commitment to multilateralism. Some people say that you're a very nice country, but that may be news to people in Silicon Valley. And I want to tell us why you're moving ahead alone. Some people might say even going rogue on this digital services tax, and while other countries are now delaying implementing it for another year.
While other countries are?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, just on Canadian niceness, we actually do believe in being nice. We believe in being polite. When we have disputes, we think that they should be negotiated in a civil way. And Mike Froman is here. He and I did our rounds on softwood lumber, so I hope he can attest to that. But we also believe at the end of the day you have to stand up for the national interest. On the OECD Pillar 1, just to offer one quick precision, Matt, the one-year standstill is not being held up by Canada. It's been agreed by other countries. Well, it's been agreed at the officials level. Our concern with the Pillar 1 agreement is more than 2 years ago, when the OECD two-pillar deal was done in the first instance, Canada already had a published intention to put in place a DST. We published it in our fall economic statement in 2020. That's a budget document. That for us, it's not like a rhetorical thing. It's not a press release. It means the government is going ahead with a policy. But then the Biden administration came into office. All of a sudden, the international tax negotiations, the two-pillar negotiations, really started to go somewhere. And it was a really optimistic moment for multilateralism. And all of a sudden, it seemed as if we could achieve this very ambitious two-pillar agreement. And as part of that, France, the UK, Italy, Austria, and subsequently also India and Turkey had their DSTs grandfathered into the deal. But the ask of Canada was that we would accept not being grandfathered, although we had a published intention to move ahead. And that was a big concession for us. We had published this intention. There was cross-party support for us to do it. But we felt at that time, for the deal to go forward, we would accept that we would delay our implementation for 2 years to Jan 1, 2024, with the hope and belief that at that point, the two pillars would go into force, and we would never have to put a DST in place because the whole world would be moving ahead with Pillar 1. So that's the history. As it happens, Pillar 1 hasn't progressed. And so Canada is being asked, again, having agreed to a 2-year standstill, to agree to further standstills with no fixed date at which either Pillar 1 comes into force or Canada is on a level footing with the other DST countries. And so for us, that's clearly a disadvantageous position. The one positive news I want to offer you, Matt, I was in India for the G20 finance ministers meeting at the beginning of this week, and we had very good conversations at the G7 bilaterally with Secretary Yellen about this challenging situation. And we definitely are not there yet, but I think there is goodwill on our sides. I think there is a good understanding of Canada's concerns. We have a good understanding of the US concerns and needs. And I think there is a possibility of a path forward that works for everybody.
But as things stand, you're going to go alone to tax, the Apples and Googles on 3% of their kind of revenue because you don't think it's being collected now fairly. And you're also alone on surpassing this, I guess, a link tax, as Silicon Valley would call it, that you should pay publishers would be paid for the links to stories on the site. on the platforms in Canada. And here too, you seem to be going further than Australia and other countries that are considering certain things. And publishers are both happy to get the revenue, but worried about losing traffic because now the platforms are going to basically pull out of Canada. Is there any consideration to change the approach? I know the law has passed twice in Parliament to modify this link tax.
Okay, so Matt and I have worked together for 30 years as journalists. So I'm going to say something that I know will be very annoying. Like, it's so annoying when you're interviewing a politician and they say, that wasn't quite right in the question. But I do have to say, Canada's intention is in no way to go alone with the DST. In fact, today, the UK, France, Italy, Austria, India, and Turkey all have a DST in place and have been grandfathered into having a DST in place. So that's a very important aspect of this. On our legislation to ensure that Canadian news organizations are compensated for links, I'm really glad you asked about it, because as a former journalist and now a politician, it's something that I feel very strongly about, and I do commend Australia for moving first. And I think there's really our democracy at issue here. You know, I will not say that every single press conference I attend I love. I don't love every question a journalist asks me, but I know it's shocking, Steve. But I do know we need Canadian journalists who are well paid and well resourced and who are writing about what is happening in Canada for us to have a healthy democracy, to hold decision makers to account, and to inform Canadians about what's happening in Canada. And the reality is, because of the economics of the web advertising business, Canadian newsrooms are being hollowed out. And it is happening to our national news organizations, and it is happening at a local level. And it is visibly, discernibly weakening our democracy. It's a real, real social and political problem. And so we have put forward legislation that I think is absolutely fair. We love, like, we're regular people. We love all the great things that the web gives us. We love search. We love using social media to connect. But I think this is not a Canadian problem. I think this is a world problem. I think collectively we need to figure out some legislative frameworks that ensure we can have healthy, well-resourced news organizations. And I think at the end of the day, the resources do have to come from the tech companies. And you could say, well, if you think this is so important for Canadian democracy, maybe the government should just pay for it. But I think there's a real challenge with news organizations deriving a great deal of their revenue from the public sector, from the government. So, you know, this is a challenging issue, but I have to say Canadians understand this, and Canadians are very, very supportive of what the government is doing here.
So we're all for journalism, obviously, and I guess it sounds like you're not changing that law, that approach.
Well, I do, like, look, I said Canadians are polite, but firm in defense of the national interest. Good. I really think in most issues, if you have goodwill, if both parties are able to be really clear about what their core interests are, more often than not, you can find a win-win solution. And we are very open to that. And our Minister of Heritage, Pablo Rodriguez, I think has been having good conversations, particularly with Google. And that's something that we want to continue.